We were spending billions of dollars per year on these immersive, incredible experiences. But does it work? And they're like, oh, we have no idea. It drove me absolutely crazy that we had no data. And the entire idea was that digital marketing was completely oversaturated, right? We see like 14,000 advertisements a day. I believe we're in the middle of a massive cultural and economic shift from a things economy to an experience economy. We met Marc Benioff, the CEO of Salesforce. Marc was like, look, Jonathan, this is basically like the experiential Salesforce. I was like, yeah, that's kind of what we're trying to do here. There's a huge opportunity here. And he basically is like, I think you should pivot into this. And he invested, and we pivoted to enterprise, and the rest was history.
Welcome to Entrepreneur's Handbook Podcast, where we share inspiring startup stories with practical takeaways for you, the listener. Today we have with us Jonathan Yaffe, who's the founder of AnyRoad and its current CEO. He's also been a serial entrepreneur in Japan. How are you doing today, Jonathan?
Fantastic. Great out here in California. How's everything there, Amar?
So we were talking about this beforehand, right? It's freezing here. We've got snow, but it's very sunny behind you, so I'm very jealous.
I'll send some. I'll send some right over.
Yeah, I'll happily take that. So, as I mentioned in the intro, there you were a serial entrepreneur in Japan beforehand, and you mentioned to me how that all started. Can you explain to the listeners why did you become an entrepreneur in the first place? What was your motivation?
I've never really known anything else. I've never really had a job working for somebody else, and I don't know if I would survive it. I think I would probably fire myself instantly. So it was always just something I kind of expected that was what I had to do, is if I couldn't find a place to work, I was just going to start my own organizations. So, other than my first job right out of college, everything else was just kind of, find a huge opportunity that I was really passionate about and start to build a business.
What was that very first business you did?
Well, I had a failed.com when I was a freshman in college, but my first real business was in Japan, was a K through 12 international school. I got to Japan. I was 23 years old. I was broke. I just went to Tokyo to eat sushi for a couple of weeks. Noticed that there was a huge opportunity to build a really different type of what I call a boutique international school, and started it. And it was still running today. It's very successful. About 150 students from over 20 countries. And it's one of the foremost boutique international schools in Asia now.
So walk us through that process, because at the age of 23, how would you even go about starting a school? Because I can imagine you have to get a place to have the school in the first place, get teachers, get students to, and it's more going to be parents to believe in you, that they're sending their kids somewhere where their kids are going to learn. How do you build up that credibility so quickly? It
was tough. Number one, I didn't tell anyone my age. So, I have earrings, and I would take out my earrings on the way to school every day because I didn't want people to see that I had earrings. I got really good at kind of getting around questions about how old I was. And people would be like, you look really young. And I'm like, thanks. Because young people never say that. And so, how old are you? Oh, older than I look. That was always the response. I saw this opportunity, 26 million people in Tokyo. I realized largest city in the world, I should be able to find 100 students who would want to come to this school. I raised a little bit of money, and the person that I raised money from actually had a space I could start doing this. And I was literally going and handing out flyers in front of train stations and going to other schools when they had their Setsumekai, which is a day when they introduce the school and give an introduction and give a tour and a walkthrough. I would go and stand outside of those and say, if you end up not wanting to go to this school, you should check out my school. It was really, really tough. But I ended up getting my first student. It was this 14-year-old girl. She had been kicked out of another school, and her parents were desperate. And I got my first student, and I was like, I am going to put everything into her success. Started the second year with 12 students, and again, just hustling my way to getting everyone together. And I built my own curriculum. Right. So because of that, I didn't have to play by, the rules of, some big governing body. I also found a really interesting loophole where the government of Japan says that international schools are not real schools because they don't want people to go to them. But in doing so, they couldn't regulate me like a school. So it was technically a business providing a service of education, but because of that, it was just this great loophole where they couldn't, say, no, this is not a real school. This is not the right curriculum, because they said fundamentally, you're not a school. Stuff kind of worked together. And I said, look, I'm also very passionate about education and, working with kids and teenagers to grow. And it was a very fulfilling time.
What did you learn from that experience? Because obviously it's quite a different startup. So I don't think I've ever had a guest on here come on before and say their first startup was a school. So what were the lessons you learned from that you could then apply to later businesses?
I learned a very interesting lesson about never giving up, because yes, we got from one student to 12 to 150, but there was a lot of down years in between there. From a sales perspective, it's really, you kind of brought this up, but it's really interesting having multiple stakeholders that sometimes have very divergent needs. So I would get a 15-year-old kid and their parents for an information session, and I had two very different stakeholders here. Right. I had to make sure that the parents thought that this was a buttoned up school. We're going to get your kids into great universities. Look at our SAT history here. Look at all of our curriculum. Like, we are a serious buttoned up school. But like, these kids also had to want to go there. And for the kids, you also have to emphasize the fact, like, we have really good arts programs. We have one MacBook per student. We go on ski and snowboard trips every year. We do yoga every week. Like, and it's like, how do you design this, like, knowing that there are multiple stakeholders, sometimes with conflicting desires? And then the other thing is, the reason that I saw the opportunity for this in Japan was there are a ton of international schools in Japan. There's the American school, there's the Canadian school, there's the Indian school, there's the French school. There's all these huge, amazing international schools. But no one had ever built a very small, purpose-built school with like 10 students per class, right? With a lot of focus on emotional intelligence and a lot of focus on the arts and creativity, but also very high level of academics. No one had ever built something like that. And there were a lot of times that I almost pivoted it, because I realized that just by copying these other schools out there, I probably could have grown a lot faster. But ultimately, my moat would have completely disappeared, right? And I learned a lot about saying, look, when you build something that is unique and different, and you're building something for a new market, doubling down on that and what makes you unique and diverse, rather than saying, hey, I know that I can probably grow 10, 20, 30% faster by copying everybody else.
And then from there, what else did you do in Japan? Because obviously you did multiple businesses. Can you tell us about some of the other stuff you got up to?
Yeah, I had a small events business for a while, but shut that down after the big earthquake in Japan. I started with a friend of mine, the first independent think tank in Japan called the Mirai Institute. Mirai means future. And through that, we built out a network of art galleries. We built out a network of co-working spaces. This was like way pre-WeWork. And through that, we built this really strong community centered in Tokyo, but now we're other parts in Japan too, with artists and architects and designers and entrepreneurs, and really wanted to nurture that kind of community and young people in a way that we couldn't really find in Japan before that.
How did your time shift as well? Because obviously at the beginning it was mainly based on the school, but then by the time you left Japan, which was only fairly recently, how did that evolve over time? Was it going more towards the Mirai Institute? Because obviously, what I imagine is by working with entrepreneurs all the time, you're going to constantly get new ideas and seeing other. It's a good way to get excited about life, I think, isn't it? When you're seeing all these people doing such creative and amazing things, it keeps that passion going for you too.
Yeah, well, I mean, when I started this school, I was doing everything, right? I was teaching most classes. I was, doing our digital marketing. I was building our website. I would work on curriculum in the evenings and the weekends. I was trying to find new students and do acquisition there. I was doing the finances. I was doing everything, right? But I don't have a background in education, right? And so at some point, I had to actually hire real teachers and hire real educators and people who had done this way more than me, and took a step back and moved myself into the headmaster position, right? So I could start to look at strategy and growth and that, but not look at the day-to-day kind of academics and function of the school. And that worked really well for me. And same thing with Mid-Eye Institute. I started it with a good friend of mine, but neither of us had any real intent to focus on it full time. We believed that this had to exist, but we also believed that there were better people to run it than us. And the way that I look at kind of building businesses is kind of starts from like, I believe that this needs to exist in the world. I also believe that this is a very great business. And if I'm the best person to run it, then that's great. But if there's somebody who can do better at it, I want to do my part to will it into existence, support it, fund it, whatever needs to happen. So slowly, my focus started to shift away from things in Japan. And when I started AnyRoad, I actually decided that I couldn't do that in Japan. And that brought me back here to San Francisco.
With the Mid-Eye Institute and the school, was there any crossover? Because what I'm just thinking about myself now, so I'm starting my own organization in the UK with entrepreneurs and like connecting them together. But then we also want to get into schools where we're making sure that it's not just that once people are already successful, because the problem is like once people have gone through their schooling system, often by then they might already believe, I can never become an entrepreneur. Whereas if you show people those opportunities earlier on, it's not like everybody has to become an entrepreneur, right? Because it's not right for everybody. But at least as long as you know that it's a possibility for you, because sometimes people shut themselves down, like, I couldn't do that, rather than they've just been conditioned that way. So did you have that interplay where maybe you had people from the institute come and talk to your school kids and like the other way around just to see?
Yeah, a little bit. I think if I had continued on in Japan, I would have worked more to nurture that. I mean, they both came from the same philosophy, which was to nurture those kinds of opportunities for folks. There's some really good studies that have come out recently predicting entrepreneurial success in adulthood. And the biggest causation that they found was some sort of opportunity to do something entrepreneurial in childhood. Like even if it's like a lemonade stand or selling fruit by the side of the road or something entrepreneurial leads to, wow, this is an option for something that I can do with my life, rather than, hey, what jobs are available to me? I remember in school when I was a kid, you had to take these like personality tests, and then they would say, oh, based on your personality, you should be a lawyer, or like you should be a dentist. But like entrepreneur or CEO was like founder was never one of those options. And the existing system is not built to nurture that, right? And so a lot of what I was doing in Japan, with both with the school and the institute, was to actually like not just give people those opportunities, but actually teach people that this is a viable option. And even though there are a lot of pieces of Japanese society that look down on entrepreneurship and going your own way, you can still be very successful and very happy and lead a fulfilling life by going these directions.
And obviously AnyRoad now has grown it's grown significantly, right? So the idea that entrepreneurship can be very successful is you're an example of that yourself. But like for the people who aren't really aware of what AnyRoad does, could you give us a brief description of where the idea came from as well? What's the problem you're solving?
Yeah. I'll give you a little background first, and then I'll jump in there. So before the whole Japan thing, right after college, I got hired into this little company you may have heard of called Red Bull. I was one of the first marketing hires when Red Bull first came to the States. And it totally blew my mind because we were spending billions of dollars per year on experience, these immersive, incredible experiences. And the entire idea was that digital marketing was completely oversaturated, right? We see like 14,000 advertisements a day. But you bring your friends to this crazy Red Bull event, and there are people jumping out of airplanes, going down mountains on tricycles, DJs are playing, people are dancing, everyone's having an amazing time, and somebody comes up to you and hands you an ice cold Red Bull. This actually creates an emotional bond that not only changes your perspective of the brand, but also changes your behavior going forward. So we really believed in the power of experiential marketing. We put $1 billion a year into it. Clearly it worked, right? Red Bull has by far number one market share, but it drove me absolutely crazy that we had no data. We had no real understanding of just how powerful these experiences are and even who was participating in them, right? So cut to now, and I believe we're in the middle of a massive cultural and economic shift from a things economy to an experience economy. And we see this in terms of millennials who are spending way more money on experiences than things. Car ownership is declining globally. Retail brands are literally shutting down every single week. right? But the brands that are thriving are actually transforming themselves into experiential companies. And what we saw is that literally where Red Bull wrote a lot of this playbook, now every brand that's thriving is becoming an experiential business. The only problem is they still don't have the data behind it. So when I saw this opportunity with my brother Daniel, we realized that there was a huge opportunity here that no one had touched. Leaving Japan, I really wanted to do something that had much more impact, right? So like, with the school, I've, impacted probably 1,000 students, right? And I was very fulfilled by that. It was amazing. But with AnyRoad, we are touching tens of millions of consumers a year, right? Through incredible immersive experiences all over the world. And for me, like that kind of impact, helping hopefully move the world into a more experiential model away from a things model, is something that I'm very proud of. So essentially, AnyRoad is a platform for experiences, experiential marketing, and the ROI behind it.
So did your brother live in Japan with you as well? Or how did you kind of come up with this idea together?
Yeah. So no, he was living in San Francisco still. And we came up with, from two different sides, we kind of saw the same problem. I saw it from the Red Bull side, and I lived that. He had written a book about whiskey called Drink More Whiskey. And in doing that, he did what I call research. He traveled all over the world, like, going to the Macallan Castle up in Scotland and going to Japan to drink Japanese whiskey and going to, visit the Kentucky Bourbon Trail in Kentucky and just like learning all about different whiskeys. And he wrote this incredible book. And along the way, he saw that literally every brand was spending hundreds of millions of dollars per year on experiential marketing, right? On building out these incredible tours and tastings and castles and education programs and pairing dinners and all this stuff. And he'd go to them and say, why are you spending so much on experiential? And they're like, oh, because when people come to the Macallan Castle up in Scotland, and they, they're hanging out there and there's a butler and they go and they get to taste this old Macallan and walk around the peat fields, and like this actually builds this like lifelong love. And the next time they're somewhere in the world and they want some scotch, they're going to order Macallan. And Daniel's like, yeah, that's true. But does it work? And they're like, oh, we have no idea. So we both came into it from different perspectives, but really understanding that across really all consumer companies, experiential has risen to be such a large share, both of spend and also of mind share, to really kind of build consumer engagement. But still, no one had any idea what was working and what was not.
How did you build the actual platform itself then? So both of you had different backgrounds from different parts of the world. But then when it was coming to, okay, now we need to create something and get those first customers, how did you get those first customers to kind of believe in what you were doing and to come on board?
We started in the wrong market. So we identified the right problem, and it's still the problem we're solving today. But we started with small businesses. And this didn't work at all. So at one point we had 6,500 customers all over the world. The company was not doing well, and we almost shut down the company. Right? We built this platform for SMBs. We were in like 100 countries. And around the same time, we met Marc Benioff, the CEO of Salesforce. Marc was like, look, Jonathan, this is basically like the experiential Salesforce. And I was like, yeah, that's kind of what we're trying to do here. And he's like, but you have one core flaw. This should not be an SMB platform. Enterprises need this. They will pay you a lot of money for it. There's a huge opportunity here. And he basically is like, I think you should pivot into this. And he invested, and we pivoted to enterprise, and the rest was history.
Wow. Yeah. Because if that meeting hadn't happened, were you when you were thinking about closing the company, what was the, emotions you were going through at that point, right? Because when you say originally, right, you said you had 6,500 customers. Then for most people, like starting out a business, they'd be like, wow, like they've got 6,500 customers. How do they get that far? And it's just very difficult almost to fathom for somebody from the outside of like closing down their business at that stage. And was it almost difficult because you're like, we know that people need this, but it's just not a business that's making money?
I think it's twofold. One, we probably would have arrived at that conclusion, but probably not seen it as clearly without that conversation. We were already starting to piece together like what is the valuable piece here, and how does that data coming out of it. But the bigger thing is we were stuck in a very strange growth trajectory. So the way that I look at it is, if growth is declining, it's fairly obvious this is not working. Let's shut it down. Let's move on. If growth is like a hockey stick, that's also very obvious. Like, we have a great opportunity here. But growth was like slowly increasing a tiny bit every month for like 4.5 years. And at that rate, you're just like, wait, we're growing. It's not amazing growth. It's not venture backable growth, but it's something. There's something there, but also like, we need to raise money, right? We need to fund the business. We're not profitable, and no VC is going to, fund a company that's growing, a couple percent a month.
If people are listening to this rather than watching, Jonathan's doing a very good explanation there of how they're growing as well. So make sure you check this out on YouTube.
Shitty y-intercept and a shitty slope is basically what I'm doing with my hand. We had folks on the team who were like, we can't shut this down. We're growing, and 6,500 SMBs depend on us every week. It's like, yeah, but this is never going to be a significant business. It was really hard to acquire these SMBs. They churned all the time. Like, it was just not a good business, right? Certainly not a business that was going to change the world. Yeah, it was a lot of difficult conversations, in my own head, but also internally with my executive team.
When was that pivot now? So how long has it been since you switched over?
We've been running the business for about 9 years. So that was the first 4.5 years. We pivoted, raised a seed round on the pivot. 6 months later, signed our first enterprise contract. And so we've been running this business for about 4.5 years.
How did it feel signing that first enterprise client?
Amazing. That first enterprise client paid us about the same amount than all of the 6,500 SMBs were paying us altogether. It was just like, it was just a total mind shift, and led us to see that there was a light at the end of the tunnel. And the way I think about it is, people are like, oh, aren't you burnt out? It's been 9 years, and no, I'm not, because I love what we're doing, and I think that the impact is clear, but also it feels like a different business, right? So I don't feel like I've been doing this for 9 years. Yes, the name of the business is the same, but like basically everything else is different. And frankly, I feel like we've been running this for 4.5 years. And then the other side of this is, these things take a long time, right? And, I like this idea of like, don't be a unicorn, be a cockroach, right? If you never die, you'll eventually, pivot your way to success.
Yeah, it's a good idea. What's the bit that you love about the business the most now? You said like you're not burnt out on it, you're still enjoying what you're doing. What parts of it do you love the most?
Yeah, I mean, number one, I love my team. We have a really interesting team, and we're building something that has never existed in the world. So it's brand new, it's very creative, and we have a team that's like down for that journey. And that's my favorite part about it. I also love that we get to work with really amazing brands that we love, right? So we get to work with like, the Kentucky Bourbon Trail and the North Face and Ben and Jerry's and
Do you have to test out the ice cream as part of your job?
it's the research phase. And we get to work with all these incredible brands all over the world, which is amazing. But the other thing is, like, we're not selling some crap online, right? We're selling experiences that have low carbon footprints, make the world a better place, bring joy to people, and bring people closer to brands that they care about. I love going into work and like knowing that we have a big screen in the office that shows everywhere in the world where people are participating in AnyRoad experiences, and it's like it's crazy. I mean, it's the entire world is lit up. It's really amazing.
From this first 4.5 years, what are some of the kind of hard lessons that you learned? Obviously, you learned that it's best to go for enterprises rather than SMBs for your business model. But is there anything else you learned, and other pivots you had to make too?
The word pivot has become like a dirty word, right? And people are like, oh, they pivoted, yeah, But frankly, I think that pivoting is really the key to a lot of company success, and people just don't talk about this enough, right? Like Slack started out as a video game. Flickr started out also as a video game, right? Nintendo was a playing card company. Twitter was a photo sharing app, I think. Instagram, I think, was bourbon. Oh no, sorry. Twitter was podcasting. Yeah. And so I mean, like, Instagram was like sharing drinks recommendations and check-ins. And frankly, almost every successful company at some point had a major pivot. But I feel like people make up their origin stories to make things a little sexier, but not saying, hey, this was a 10, 15 year slog through multiple massive pivots. And every time we pivoted, we had to turn over the entire team because we didn't have the right people in seat. But we didn't give up, and we pivoted our way to find out a great opportunity, and it worked. So yes, I think I should have. I think the lesson is embrace the pivot sooner and constantly look for opportunities to pivot into until we got really, serious product market fit.
And what's been the adjustments you've had to make as well? Because obviously, from being a headmaster to running an entrepreneurial society to a business which was, like you said, growing slowly and doing well, but wasn't venture scale, to now a massive company that's venture scale, has tons of funding, investors on your back, all of this kind of stuff. What's been the toughest adjustment in that period from what you're doing now from what you were doing before?
I don't think it's that different. I know that's not what you expected me to say. Look, I don't think it's that different from a day-to-day perspective. I do think I've had to get better at kind of leveling myself up. I need to get better. I have had to get better about delegating responsibility, right? Like now it's, when it's me trying to run an entire school by myself, it's me. And, I just rely on myself and, drink a lot of caffeine and just work harder. And now it's not about me at all. It's about, this incredible team, and can I build this amazing executive team to actually handle the day-to-day and the strategy, and can I get people who are, my entire executive team, without exaggeration here, is much better than me. Every single one of them, right? Like I couldn't do this without them, right? And like getting to that point is an entirely different skill, an entirely different framework for how to build a company, rather than like I'm just going to go out and like brute force my way to success, which is kind of what happened in Japan with my first couple of companies. So now it's a lot more, how do I build an enduring organization? How do I build in some processes, but not too many processes, because I still believe that startups require an intense amount of chaos to survive.
I guess talk more about that chaos there. You've slipped in at the end there.
Yeah. I think about this a lot. Sometimes I think about changing my title like Chief Chaos Officer. So like you are two founders in a garage starting a startup. It is 100% chaos, zero process. You're just, no one knows what's happening. There's nothing documented. Like it was just total chaos. But like that kind of chaos breeds creativity, right? And fast pivots and exploration and, building and building. Then let's make fun of some massive company, Oracle, right? Oracle, I imagine, has very little or zero chaos. Right? It is all a strict set of processes. If this, then that, right? You have middle level managers who come in and they don't actually do anything. They just make sure that the next middle level manager under them is doing something else. I've never worked at Oracle, so I apologize.
I used to be an Oracle CRM consultant, so I can't comment on any of this. I'm smiling.
But so along the way, you move from a kind of total chaotic entropy type of scenario to something like Oracle. And Oracle could not run with a ton of chaos. It just would not be what it is today. And also, two entrepreneurs in a basement or garage could not work with a lot of process. It would hinder them, right? So I believe that one of the things that we have that large companies don't, and the reason that we can actually win, is speed. And the ability to maintain an amount of chaos that lets us move very agilely and in a very agile way in different directions. But I've also seen companies, we're a Series B startup. I've seen companies at this stage who go way too much in on the process, and that they end up losing the creativity to be able to make fast pivots and fast changes when that needs to happen. So an example is we are an experience business, right? We thrive on in real life experiences. We've always said we don't do digital experiences. We don't do VR experiences. I always talk shit about the metaverse because I think it's stupid. Like, we're all about IRL, in real life experiences. And we have the data to show just how powerful that is. So COVID hit, and the volume of in real life experiences in March 2020 went from like tens of millions to essentially zero. And we had no idea what to do, right? Like, literally no one was doing experiences. And I saw other companies that were in similar situations that really, focus on in real life experiences, and their companies were not agile enough to actually figure this out. And they just kind of ran into a wall. And a lot of companies shut down. A lot of companies had to scrap the entire company, stuff like that. Someone in our organization, I have no idea who this was, but said, maybe we should just move all of our customers onto Zoom. And this was before all these like digital conferences. This was like week 1 of the pandemic when people were freaking out. And we're like, let's try it. And we had been like talking shit about Zoom experiences forever, right? But like we built this platform and got a beta out in 2 weeks, migrated all of our customers onto AnyRoad at home, and this saved the company. And we actually thrived during the pandemic, signed up more customers, ended up doing both digital and in real life when they reopened, and we kept 100% of our customers. So it was really like, yes, it was whoever thought of that, but it was also the ability of the entire organization to be like, here's a brand new idea that was never on the roadmap. In fact, something we actively shot down over and over again because we thought was dumb, but like we embraced it, made the entire company run in that direction, and it saved the company. So that would not have happened if we were too process oriented and did not allow and actually nurture that kind of chaos.
It reminds me of that phrase, strong opinions loosely held. And I think sometimes people have these strong opinions, but then when the facts change or the circumstances change, they're too stubborn to let go of it. And I know what you said there about the idea of these experiences being stupid, because I'd have probably agreed with you 2 or 3 years ago, right? When I wouldn't have wanted to sit there on Zoom and do these quizzes and things like that. Like, I didn't think it's anybody's idea of fun 5 years ago, but we all ended up doing it because we didn't have any other choice.
Out of necessity, we did. And well, now we're not doing that anymore.
and that's the thing. It's also being able to, sometimes what people do is to back themselves into a corner. But because you've said it's dumb and you've said it over and over again, and people in the organization, was any part of you that's like, oh, maybe we should, are people going to think I'm a hypocrite by changing this? Or are people going to think, oh, we've gone against our values? Did any of that ever come into play? Or were you just like, okay, we've got to do this, it's a necessity, and this is the way it's got to be?
In my own head, right, but not externally, right? And I nurtured the chaos as much as I could, and frankly, desperation breeds creativity. We didn't have a lot of options here, right? And like, it was, when you're up against the bank account and up against the clock and the company's at massive risk, this is when people really step up and, pull long days and pull long nights and come up with crazy ideas that the CEO is already talking shit about, and and figure out how to make it work. So, I think most of my job now is to try to continue to nurture a company and a culture that invites that, rather than kind of shutting it and say, stay in your lanes, go do your work.
You mentioned there as well about sort of bigger companies need their processes in order to sustain themselves, right? If they have chaos, they won't be able to do what they're doing. It's one of the difficult things for many startups is, where is that inflection point? And how do you make that adjustment? Because obviously the path that AnyRoad is on, you continue growing. Sooner or later, when you're such a big company, it's going to be very difficult to have that kind of chaos and have that agility. And how do you plan for that as well?
I have no idea. I mean, it's something I think a lot about. I don't think that there's one specific inflection point, right? I mean, I think that there are certain processes that we've had to build in the business just in the last year that in the past we have tried to eschew, specifically around go-to-market, sales, making data-driven decisions. Too much chaos and budgets get out of control also, right? That being said, there's creative chaos. You don't want a bunch of like monkeys swinging around and like, dirt all over the floor and like, crazy parties. I mean, it's not about not having, expectations and pushing folks hard. It's about allowing for people's creativity and mind to explore different directions that may save the company or may 10x the company at some point.
There's somebody I interviewed in the past where, so Octopus Energy, they've got 6 billion in revenue, but they don't have a HR department. So it's one of these processes where they're really stuck to it. They don't want to have any process around HR. And it's something that seems crazy to so many people, but it proves that sometimes you can get very far without these processes. And we sometimes think we need them more than we do. And it's really interesting to see when people are experimenting with that at their own companies, because then it opens other people's eyes up to like, okay, we could actually keep growing without this traditional processes there. But like I mentioned there about how, like, obviously AnyRoad is going to continue growing and you're going to continue doing what you're doing. But like for people listening, if they're kind of keeping an eye on what AnyRoad is doing, what's some of the things they can look out for in the future? What's expansions or what's your longer term vision?
Most of our business these days is in just a couple verticals, right? CPG, retail, attractions, auto, verticals like that. There are about 40 other verticals that are very excited to expand into. Everything from live music, entertainment, financial services, education, politics. And we're really excited to start to explore these other verticals to bring, deep consumer experiences and experiential data to them. And so the way we're also internationalizing quite a bit, right? So we're expanding actually very rapidly right now in Europe and EMEA, and a lot of our customers are very international anyways, and are pulling us in a lot of different directions to new territories, and that's exciting too. So yeah, there's a lot to do. I think my biggest learning here is not about all the possibilities, but is really just staying focused. It's something I was not good at when I was younger. I wanted to do everything, and I wanted to do everything today. And that lack of focus was great from like a discovery perspective, like in the very early stages, but made it hard to progress in a very, linear fashion. So, and now that I'm continuing to try to work on myself, I also work with my team to make sure everyone's staying focused. And because there's always, shiny objects and things that, could pay off and, random bets, but really just staying focused on building a massive company and bringing people to incredible immersive experiences is really what we're all about.
Really excited to see what the future holds for AnyRoad and how it's going. And obviously, as we know that the trends are going that way in terms of people seeking out more experiences and also brands understanding this better and trying to make that experience that customers want to hold on to and keep those memories of. But if people want to find out more about you and AnyRoad, where should they go to? I'm
not really big on the socials, but I am on Twitter. Where is Yaffe? And AnyRoad.com, or you can email me directly at jonathan@anyroad.com.
Perfect. So thanks so much for coming on today.
It's been great to be here. Thanks so much.